we're all getting started. All right, welcome back. It's 2 o'clock, so we'll get started with our next presentation. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Charmaine Rochester. She graduated from Howard University College of Pharmacy and then did a PGY1 at Medical University of South Carolina. I know we have some MUSC people in the room, and her PGY2 at University of Mississippi Medical Center. I know we have some other Mississippi people. So she is a certified diabetes care and education specialist and board certified ambulatory care pharmacist. She is a professor here and an associate clinical director of the P3E Health Services at our School of Pharmacy, and she practices at the Center for Diabetes and Endocrinology. And she's going to talk to us about self-assessment. Why are we still measuring and teaching it? I don't know, tell us.
All right. Well, thank you all. Unlike the previous speaker, I have not done this 6 times. So that's my first disclaimer. This is my first time. And why am I talking about self-assessment? Well, one of the previous residency coordinators said to me, I want you to teach our residents how to better self-assess. And I started looking at the literature and I realized that's not a good goal. And so that's my theory today. In all of these self-regulating professions like pharmacy, medicine, nursing, we all hold our members accountable to the public for which we serve. And as a result of this, we ensure that they meet certain standards. For example, as a student, you must complete an accredited School of Pharmacy. As a resident, you want to complete an accredited residency. And all of these have standards. But once you leave the residency program, what happens next? You begin to do continuing education development credits, right? And you self-assess yourself during these particular education programs. And you say, this is what I need for my learning needs, or these are what I need for my developmental needs. And my theory is, are we going to rely on what you self-assess in order to develop your educational needs? So this doesn't seem to be working. All right, so at the end of this presentation, we want to be able to define self-assessment and look at the limitations and inaccuracies in self-assessment. We want to look at the scientific evidence for or against self-assessment, provide some practical strategies using a conceptual model, and also discuss a vignette to establish the inherent flaws that are seen in self-assessment. So we're going to look at this video. This is a very amateur video of a resident, myself. I'm just pretending to be a resident. And I'm going to self-assess I'm self-assessing my activity at my clinic. So let's look at it briefly. All right, so we will see here that this resident has self-assessed and believes she's doing an excellent job. And there's a discordancy between what the preceptor thinks and what the resident thinks. So let's first look at the definition of self-assessment. One of the problems with the definition is that there are many, many different definitions, and there's no consistency even in the definition of self-assessment. But according to Andrade and colleagues, they suggest that if someone reflects on the quality of their work and they judge their work based on a particular standard, a particular goal, and then you identify your strengths and your weaknesses based on this and you revise accordingly. Some definitions will even suggest that you revise accordingly within a particular time frame. But there's some crucial facets in self-assessment. You have to be able to know what is the standard. What is the standard? Many times we sit in student affairs, we listen to the students and their complaints. And they say, well, no one really told me that this is what I'm supposed to do. So once again, you have to be very clear, what's the objective, what's the standard? And then the person who is doing self-assessment have to be willing to observe and compare their behavior to their peers. Many people don't like that. Many times students say, don't compare me with the other students who've been through the rotation. But according to this definition, you do have to compare. So sometimes a preceptor might say, you know, this resident is different from my previous residents. Once again, there's a peer referencing. They're comparing the resident's work to previous residents. Now, you have to be able also to realize that when you have this peer referencing, it is used to reorient your behavior. For example, here's the standard, this is my expectation. And so once you hear your weaknesses, you have to be able to use the information to reorient that behavior and then use other strategies also to affect your future behaviors. Now, we all know that the Accreditation Council on Pharmacy Education states that self-assessment should be started at the beginning of the curriculum and go right throughout a student's curriculum. But what happens next? During school, students may have reflective logs, they may have journals, they may have learning portfolios, and they document the work they're doing, what they think, and they also may write their learning needs or development needs. But do we depend on that in order to develop educational programs? In the pharmacy world, we use accredited schools and education, residency programs, and all of these as bedrocks for initial pharmacy competence. But the issue is after a resident completes their education, what happens next? Most of their career is spent doing these continuing education credits with an unstructured self-assessment. They're doing it in isolation. This is what I think. And it relies on this self-assessment to determine what are their improvement needs. We get those questions at the end of certain programs to say, what do you think you need in order to continue learning or developing, etc. So using this unguided self-assessment as cornerstone for continuous development is usually not good. And the literature shows that there are many problems and flaws with self-assessment. There are so many in the literature, and I'm only going to present a few of the flaws in self-assessment. One is that lack of knowledge of what is the standard, what is the expectation. We assume everyone knows. I sat at the board of pharmacy for about 4 years, and many pharmacists came in with many different types of infraction, whether it's stealing medication, selling medication, whatever it is. And, you know, everyone on the board would say, but don't they know this is incorrect? This is wrong. This is unethical. I mean, are they aware of this? You would assume with such a profession, we would know what is the standard. And so this is one problem with self-assessment. We hear people say, you know, the students cannot seem to self-assess themselves well. The residents is not given a good self-assessment, etc. The literature shows, and I only put all these references here, nothing about cognitive overload, but specifically put here, in order to show you that there's a lot of literature that people are unable to independently and accurately assess their performance. They just cannot do it. Peer assessment is also better than self-assessment. Therefore, I can assess Christine very well. I could say she's doing a good job on this and this and this, and here's an area that maybe she can strengthen this particular skill. However, if I assess myself, I will assess myself very high, even though I may not be that high, I may be much lower. So the studies show continually you can self-assess your peers, but you just cannot self-assess yourself. We are also unable to peer reference. So even though we are getting the feedback from our peers, it's very difficult to accept it. And there's a lack of knowledge. When you don't know what you don't know, you just can't do it correctly. Well, why is this? Well, there's several theories of why we cannot self-assess. One is that we feel that we're doing a good job. Just like the resident, I feel I'm doing a great job. I feel I'm better than my peers. And that's called an above average effect. Another is restrained feedback. We are in an applause society. I work a lot with little children. As a matter of fact, every Friday I have grandkids coming over, and my godchildren come over. They all come, they play, they eat, they have fun. But one thing I noticed with the little children is that many times we say, oh, you know, you're doing a really good job on this. So sometimes I get them engaged in baking, cooking, etc. If I don't use the words, you're doing a good job, they'll say, well, Mama, are we not doing a good job? There's this constant need for applause. We are in an applause society. We need to feel a sense of our accomplishment. Also, many preceptors don't want to be disliked. You want to be felt like, no, this is a good preceptor. And so you cushion the feedback so much that the person doesn't really get the information correctly, not truly honest. Another problem with self-assessment is show that people do it very flippantly, very disengaged. I'm really not interested. I don't think it's all that important. And here we are using this feedback for development of professional continuing education. There's also discord, as we saw in the video. The mentor provides an accurate assessment of the reality. The resident becomes very defensive. It's somebody else's fault. It's the nurses. Excuse making, blaming, denial, a defense mechanism. I feel hurt. I got to protect my self-image. And so there's this discordance. Other studies show that sometimes people use self-assessment to talk about confidence. And that's an area of concern, because if I'm confident, it does not mean that I'm competent. Yes, I feel confident that I can do a good job, but competence is a whole different thing. And I was looking at a lot of the literature where people are correlating their confidence with competence. And this is a problem with self-assessment. There's a lack of correlation of competence with confidence with competence. There's also very poor correlation between improving self-assessment. So that was the initial charge. Could you teach the residents to improve their self-assessment? But there's a huge body of literature that shows there is absolutely very poor or no correlation between if I improve my self-assessment, I will in turn improve my performance, my skills, patient outcomes, etc. Once again, cognitive overload, but here's a lot of the literature showing this poor correlation between self-assessment improvement. So my question is then, why are we still learning about self-assessment? Why are we using it as a primary anticipated outcome? Why are we using it to determine the success of a program? There's limited reliability and validity. There's also misuse. Sometimes a weaker student or resident may say, I've been through this program, so I feel I have improved, but that doesn't make us an expert. Really, it's the performance that makes us an expert. Well, I want to look at this study here by Kruger and Dunning, and they are some of the bedrock of this theory of self-assessment. They have been cited over 1,600 times. And I do want to point at this graph here as we look at the evidence. The very green bar shows the actual scores of the participants in a study. They were supposed to self-assess their activity, and they were given some activities which have social cues and also professional cues. For example, they were supposed to tell a joke, use humor, and then self-assess that humor. They were given a puzzle, and they had to use logic in order to solve the puzzle and then self-assess that activity. And then they had to correct English grammar. So that was very objective, and then self-assess. Now they also had external advisors who were looking at them and also assessing their activity. Notice the actual scores. Many people got very low scores. If we look at the green bar starting at the bottom quartile, someone was at the 12th quartile, but they rated themselves, let's look at the blue bar, as 62 on the quartile. So they were not able to tell the joke, they were not able to correct the grammar, they were not able to do the puzzle, but they assessed themselves according to the blue perceived scores as very high. The raters, though, rated them very low. And this went on for many of the participants. If you look at the graph, you'll see there's a cross between the blue and the green bar. Therefore, there were people who were rated very high by these raters, but they also rated themselves lower. So there's a problem with overraters and underraters. The low raters did not accurately assess themselves, and so they were not able to identify what are their needs, what are the performance gaps. The high performers, on the other hand, underrate themselves, and so they are not able to recognize that I have some strengths, and these are my strengths. I have some weaknesses, these are my weaknesses, so I need to focus on these areas of weakness. Well, you might say, well, that's not pharmacy. What are you talking about, Dr. Rochester? That is not us. We are great, we are good, we are professional, we are pharmacy students after all. And so there was a study looking at pharmacy students. Now, these students, the professors went on in this article to describe how very intelligent the students were. They were the top of the land, the cream of the crop. They had to go through a very competitive process to enter into this pharmacy school. And they had to maintain grades really in high percentage in order to stay within the pharmacy school. So we have intelligent people. And the objective of this study was to do a very similar thing, to have these students self-assess and then also compare that to external raters. Now, we do have OSCE labs here at the School of Pharmacy, and many of you residents will be participating in these OSCE labs. And this was a similar activity with these students. They had to go through these labs. They had a pharmacist assessor, they had a standardized patient who were assessing them, and they had a small group of 8, and they also had this peer assessment. And so we wanted to compare the external assessors with the student self-assessment. So they were given different activities, and they had to assess things like communication, empathy, etc. What was the results? The results looked very similar to Kruger and Dunning. There was absolutely no difference. Now, this was not evaluated on the first time the students did the lab. As a matter of fact, they did the lab over and over and over all through the semester. They repeated it at least 8 times before the study was done. They did not know when the study was being performed. So they have gotten feedback on lab 1, lab 2, lab 3. They got feedback constantly to reorient their behaviors, etc. But by the time they are the 8th lab, having received all this feedback, all of the information, all of the time to correct behaviors, we see that they are self-assessing very incorrectly compared to the external assessors. Notice the bottom 25th percentile, which is the gray bar below. This is where the students have their the external rater score. The student score are the one on top. They have really self-assessed their score much higher than the external raters. In clinical knowledge, in communication, it's the same. In focus and logic, very similar, and also in empathy. Well, there were many other studies, and for the sake of time, we did not show these, but there was one with residents. They were given videos to reevaluate the videos, to reorient behaviors, and the self-assessment did not change over time. So the evidence indicates that self-assessment is it's flawed when it's used in the way that it's being used in an isolated, unguided self-assessment method. Well, I do want to switch from pharmacy and these other areas to driving a car. So let's talk about driving a car to illustrate the problems with self-assessment. Let's suppose you are teaching a teenager to drive a car. So you take the teenager out, you decide, I'm going to use some, very calm roads, a farm road. We're going to only meet a few vehicles. And so that's a safe place to teach the teenager. You give them about 2 lessons, and then the teenager says, okay, I'm ready to go on the highway. I want to go on 95. So you ask the teenager, could you self-assess? Do you really think you're ready to drive on the highway? The teenager thinks about it and they said, I think so for 3 reasons. 1, I do not have a traffic ticket. 2, I'm driving more than my fellow peers. And 3, I did not get in an accident when we did the drive. So you think about it and you say to the teenager, well, the times we drove on the farm road, remember I had to shout about 4 times, watch out, turn the car this way, careful. I even grabbed the wheel on one particular occasion. That's why we didn't get an accident. Also, your fellow teenagers don't drive anyway. So yes, with 2 lessons, you're more than them. And of course, you didn't get any traffic ticket because we were on a farm road. So what does the teenager do? There are several scenarios of self-assessment. Scenario 1, they could become really upset. You have hurt their self-image, and so they continue to self-assess inaccurately. The second scenario is where they agree with you, they become very despondent, and they say, well, okay, I'm very unsafe on the road, maybe I shouldn't even drive. Scenario 3, they agree with you and they say, okay, I'll take more lessons, I'll practice, and maybe over time I'll be more confident and go on the road. Scenario 4 is where we want them to go. You point them to the standard. This is the driving test. This is what's required in order to pass a driving test, and we are not there yet. We have to meet these standards, and this performance and safety will be improved if you meet this standard. I'm here to help you get to that point. So our focus is not on self-assessment, but is on focusing on the driving skills, the performance of that teenager. So what do we do with self-assessment? Do we throw it out like the baby with the bath water? Throw it both out, no more teaching, no more learning, no more self-assessment? Of course, we can't do that. We are preceptors, right? Residents have to self-assess. So what do we do? How do we use it for learning? Well, Sargent and colleagues developed a conceptual model because they've looked at all of the flaws in self-assessment, and they've developed a study to evaluate how could we get people to self-assess better. And there's not really a particular magic button to say, we have to do this, and this will be great self-assessment. However, in order to have an effective self-assessment, we have to think about the context in which it occurs and the reaction and needs of the individual. We have to develop high quality performance assessment. So for example, if I teach you how to inject an intramuscular injection by PowerPoint, and I give you a self-assessment, you could say, yes, I think I'm confident I can do it. Now, that's one thing. It's not good. However, if I give you a person, not an apple or an orange, a real person, and I say, I need you to inject this person with an intramuscular injection, then you show me the performance, that would be better, because now we have a standard. Here's the standard by which you know you have met all of the steps to doing this correctly. And then you have assessment and evaluation from external raters who are looking at you. So we need some really high performance type data to increase these activities. Supervisors and preceptors have to be involved in self-assessment. Now, in our VigNet, we saw the person come in, the preceptor say, I heard this and I heard that, and the resident becomes very defensive. We have to first at least collect information from both internal and external sources of the performance. Get all of the information. It's also good for preceptors to be part of that observation. As a resident, I remember my preceptor will say, I heard this and I heard that. And I say, well, it would be great if you come along and see also, you know, it's good. Get some first-hand information, gather all the information. And then the individual will interpret the information that they self-assess along with all of the information in order to make a decision. You could seek more information, gather from other people, and hopefully your participant will not reject the recommendation. Well, there's some advantages to this model, and one of it, of course, is not having self-assessment in isolation. I think I'm doing a good job. That does not work. Now the individual is filtering the information through the lens of all of these external raters who will also be helping guide that decision. And so now they can make a better judgment. Another advantage is that you can give feedback so that you can not only guide improvement, but also they can practice behaviors and develop some expertise. So in order to have this conceptual model, you do need some very clear and very specific data from trusted, credible source. This is not a preceptor who is out to get you per se. This is someone who is trying to help you improve in your clinical care. And also you want to get all of the information integrated and have it in a safe environment. That is very, very important. So you try to prevent that defensive type of behavior. It should be guided and directed and informed, and not, you know, the unguided one is definitely in an isolated way. Now I'm going to ask a question. Could you show by your hands how many people can say, I can drive, I'm a good driver? I'm a good driver. Who could say? Just raise your hand really high. So I'm a good driver. Be confident, be confident. All right. All right. Now keep your hands up if I say I am able to reverse parallel park safely and quickly in Baltimore City. Keep your hands up. If you say I am able to reverse parallel park safely and quickly in Baltimore. So much less hands, much less hands. I'm going to take my hand down because I'm not able to reverse parallel park very quickly. It could take a long time. So when you give a global assessment, very global, you know, could you drive well? Everybody would say, yeah, I could drive well. But when you come to steps like, are you able to reverse parallel park? Then there's a difference, right? You got to think about it. Self-assessment should be accomplished. You really need to be very specific and not global. All right, so let us look back at this video again. I'm not going to play it, but I'm just going to ask a quick question to the group. What should be the goal of this self-assessment as we look at Dr. Young? Anybody? What should be the goal? Do we want her to do a better job at self-assessment? Or do we want her to do a better job at the performance of the work that she's doing? I'm saying yes, so I'm not sure which one y'all are saying yes to though. So let me start again. Do we rather her learn to self-assess better, or do we want her to do a better job in the diabetes clinic?
Improve the
second
import.
one, definitely the performance. So even if we improve her self-assessment, her performance could still lag behind, right? So we want performance, and that's our focus. Our focus is in performance, not being able to self-assess better. And I hear the word all the time, especially on different committees, student affairs. Many times they students, they come before us with different issues. And many times the group say this person is not able to self-assess very well. Well, most of us, or many of us, are not able to self-assess well either. And that's not the goal. The goal is performance. How can the preceptor help? How could this preceptor help? What would you do? You are the preceptor. How would you help the residents? Anybody, any suggestion? Well, let's suppose you're in this position, right? They say, we heard this about you. What do you think will be a good outcome of this discussion? Anybody? All right, no suggestion. Yes.
You can review the specific skills that she needs to work on.
Right, so you want to review a very specific skill set, not just how are you doing, that doesn't help, but some very specific skill sets. Good, so what else? Anybody else? Yes.
Providing the standard for how the resident should conduct themselves. in the clinic.
Definitely. What is the standard of how the resident could conduct themselves? Now, in the literature, they were showing, for example, if you think of it as, let's suppose an immigrant comes to the US, and let's suppose they're on rounds with you, and they are presenting something to the team, and they're going down a slippery slope. The information is not quite correct. So the preceptor does this. Blink the eye rapidly. Clears their throat. The resident has absolutely no idea what that means, right? Have no idea. I didn't realize I was going down a slippery slope. I just thought maybe you have allergies or cough or cold or something. So we have to be very clear what is the standard. What is the standard? Nonverbal is not interpreted correctly. People blink their eyes quickly, or they have a terse smile on the face. What does that mean? I don't know what that smile means. What does it mean? So I continue down my slippery slope. So we need the standard. We always need to be very, very clear. What is the expectation of that standard? And that will help the resident a whole lot better to be able to identify. And I would say that it would be good for the preceptor to be there. So the nurses give feedback, that is great. But I would also like to go in and sit in and look and observe what the resident is doing really good and what the resident needs some improvement with. And then we can come up with a plan to address the weak areas, to say, okay, this is what may be the major problem. Here's some suggestions. Here's something you can do, and let's see how we can practice that. So in order to advance these self-assessment skills in our professional programs, it requires a whole lot more work if we are thinking of the conceptual model, because we have to develop new models and methods in order to help with self-assessment. We can't throw self-assessment out, but we got to embrace it. And in general, pharmacy students, resident professionals, physicians have, all of the literature shows have very flawed self-assessment skills. And there's a tendency for all of them in all of the studies, in ER physician, veterinarians. I mean, it really doesn't matter. They all overestimate their abilities. And so the recommendation is really to shift continuing education and certification to include methods that will involve repetitious feedback, performance evaluation, doing the actual activity, showing where the weaknesses are, giving improvements. And this will involve many pharmacy societies, licensing boards, academic centers, many organizations to help in developing these types of tools and standards, not only for students, but also professional once they get out of that particular training. So it should start at the beginning of your pharmacy training, and it should continue for the entire professional training, having this directed and informed self-assessment, not just sitting down doing an isolated self-assessment. So that's it. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, well, it's Friday afternoon, so I understand. Have a wonderful day.